again, everyone, and welcome to Lifestyle Gardening. I'm Kim Todd, and thanks for joining us again for another half hour of good gardening. On today's program, we'll be focusing on beautiful ornamentals for the fall. We'll be featuring ornamental vines, switchgrass, and this week's interview will focus on millet. Before we get to that, we're going to look at a traditional fall favorite, asters. This versatile plant bursts into beautiful purples, pinks, and blues during the late summer and fall. Let's start our show by showing you some of those fall favorites. The great perennials for color in Nebraska in the fall is the fall blooming asters. We have a couple of different species that are available to us. Over the years, what has happened is people have really become enamored with one of the cultivars of New England aster called Purple Dome. The reason for that is when it's in its glory, it is a complete dome of purple colored flowers. The unfortunate thing about the New England asters, however, and Purple Dome in particular, is they end up with foliar diseases early in the season and essentially become these leafless sticks. So until they begin blooming, there's not much to look at. The same thing can be true of the taller New England asters such as Harrington's Pink or even Alma Potchki. What happens with them is they get tall, they get spindly, they still are kind of pretty, but they don't have that great foliage. So a couple of things for you to keep in mind if you're going to choose those is you may have to do some treatment for diseases and or insect pests, which can include aphids and all sorts of other things, if you want to be able to get that beautiful purple flowering. They are great for attracting pollinators, there's no question about that, but most people don't want to have to look at that dreadful foliage before the flowering season begins. We're going to take a look at a couple of different species of asters that don't have nearly the foliar problems that the New England asters do. If you want a fall blooming aster that looks absolutely spectacular in the landscape and does not get those foliar diseases, instead of choosing the Nova Angliae types or the New England asters, choose aromatic aster, which is one of our natives as well. As you can see, it is absolutely spectacular. Covered with flowers in mid to late October. There are cultivars of this that will actually bloom all the way up until Thanksgiving. The aromatic aster likes a bit drier conditions. It thrives in full sun. It also will take a little bit of shade, although it might open up a bit. The leaves are tiny, and that suggests that this is a plant that really does not care for a whole lot of water, and that is true. It does not get those foliar diseases from the bottom. It is absolutely beloved by the pollinators. It doesn't need any pruning or trimming to be able to keep it in these spectacular mounds. And in fact, these asters were planted late last October. They were in gallon containers, and there are only 7 plants in this space. This is an aster that does not produce seed either, so it is not one that is going to show up all over in the landscape. You can choose Radon's Favorite, which is a little bit bigger and older one, Dream of Beauty, or October Glory as 3 of the cultivars that are pretty widely available. If you don't have room for this spectacular aromatic aster, you can choose one of the dwarfs. This series is called the Wood series, and they come in pink and blue and purple. As you can see, they're much lower. They're also a hybrid. They have great use as an edger or in a border. They look really pretty nice mixed in with some of the later and smaller blooming goldenrods, and they're a little bit more contained for a smaller landscape. They still give you that late flowering, although the season is not quite as long usually as the aromatic asters. And again, they're typically a cushion that is absolutely covered with those small pink, blue, or purple flowers with the yellow eye. The pollinators love them every bit as much as they like the bigger asters, and they do work really well in a smaller space. So you have a lot of choices if you want the fall blooming asters. The bigger aromatic aster, the ones that are New England asters that need a little bit more moisture and do have some of the disease problems, or the smaller Exdemosis series or the Woods asters. Of course, you can always choose the ones that aren't hardy if you do want to put them in a container on your patio. If it were up to me and I wanted one in a container on my patio, I'd buy one that I could then put into my landscape for next year. We've done plenty of preaching about planning your landscape for seasonal interest, and asters are perfect for that late summer and fall color. They're great for attracting pollinators. They do come in that wide array of colors, and they can be used in a great variety of ways in your outdoor living space. We've covered some of the more problematic vines and how to get rid of them on our summer show several times during the season. But just because some of them give vines a bad name doesn't mean we toss all of them out as garden thugs. There are some great annual vines you can use that will give any home arbor or structure some vertical interest and beauty. You've got a glimpse of these in the Backyard Farmer Garden, but for our second video, we'd like to take a more in-depth look at them and show you what they can bring to your garden. Vines are a great way to add structure to the landscape and give you some verticality without having to build a building. We've talked in previous segments about perennial vines or woody vines. They have a place in the landscape and they're there pretty much forever, and you have to have a big structure for them. So I want to look today at a couple of vines that are annual that give a completely different character to the landscape, and since they're annual, you get to start over every single year if you don't like them. Let's start by talking about moonflower vine, which is related to morning glory. It's in exactly the same genus, and as the name would suggest, this is a flower that opens at night. It opens so quickly you can actually watch those beautiful big buds unfurl with your naked eye. You don't need a time-lapse camera or anything. Then they close as the sun rises, and this is a vine that'll grow 20 feet in the air, so it'll cover a structure where it's happy. The interesting thing about moonflower vines and morning glories is they will seed themselves in the landscape. Moonflower vine, however, is considered a perennial in southern climates, and the seeds here typically do not ripen early enough to actually germinate. So one of the issues with moonflower vine is to start those seeds early. Like morning glory seeds, they don't like to be transplanted. So once you get them started, it's important to try not to disturb the roots. The best way to germinate them is to actually notch the seed. So you clip the seed away from the end that is actually attached to the pod. You don't want to damage that end. Clip the seed and then soak them overnight in water. 24 to 48 hours is usually recommended. Ideally, that water is warm, and then you can go ahead and transplant those seeds. They are a warm season grower. This was a year in which the moonflowers and the morning glories actually didn't really perform well until later in the season, but now they are absolutely spectacular. If you watch Backyard Farmer, you will note that I have talked a little bit about this particular annual vine because it is just great. It's also one that people don't know much about. This is Malabar spinach, and it is actually edible. It is one that, even though we're a little late in the season now, these leathery leaves early on are tough as a box of rocks. They taste like spinach with a little bit of a different texture. But also note the beautiful, sort of the deep purple color of the vine itself, these great pink flowers, and then the flowers turn into interesting dark black seeds. Malabar spinach will start directly in the ground once the soil warms up. So you don't have to notch the seeds, you don't have to soak the seeds, you just have to sow them gently along something that will allow it to climb up. It doesn't climb quite as tall as the moonflower vine does, but it becomes very dense in the season. And then again, once we move into the fall, creates these beautiful combination of the flowers with the seeds, with the stems, with the leaves, and you've got a cover and something you can munch on. The nasty habits of some perennial vines are well known by gardeners everywhere, as they have a tendency to take over a space, and keeping them cut back so they behave is always a chore. These annual vines will give you plenty of flexibility from season to season without the worry of them taking over your garden. One trend that is taking the gardening world by storm is ornamental pearl millet. What was once bred for grain is now a colorful option for your garden. We're fortunate to be able to talk to the experts who are instrumental in bringing these selections to the market. For this week's episode, we'll be talking to breeders David Andrews and Keenan Amundsen about new and exciting selections of ornamental pearl millet. talking about something really fun today because I get to interview two people at once, which is a whole lot of work for our producer Brad Mills. But I get to talk to Dave Andrews and Keenan Amundsen about millet, which is one of those things that people think of as a grain. So I'm going to ask the first question of you, Dave, and that is, what exactly were you doing just wandering around in a millet field and you discovered something that had purple foliage?
This was in the process of what my job was to breed grain pearl millet, but also to provide material for MSc and PhD theses. Well, in the process of that, we accumulated a genetics nursery in which was purple. And one year we had some crosses with that, and that was brought to the notice of Harlan Hamonic, who recommended we put this into horticultural tests, which in 1998 we did. And that, actually on 33 locations, came clearly first. And so that the university was able to get a license agreement with Ball Horticulture. We cleaned up that hybrid, and they started to produce it. It was named Purple Majesty, and it was a big success, and that got the gold medal from All American Selections in 2003.
Then we have the series of Purple Baron and Jester and Jade Princess, which are just fabulous. How exactly did you go about the process of creating those?
I thought that the Purple Majesty another version needed to be shorter, took longer, darker foliage, wider. So we kind of worked on that by crossing with other plants and so forth. Then we got that done. But then there's another character that's quite interesting, which was chartreuse foliage. It's actually a chlorophyll deficiency, but it turns the foliage yellow. Then we discovered that the purple color is mitigated by this chartreuse foliage, so you get a flush rather than a final dark color. And that led us to the third hybrid, which was Jester. And then we kept looking, but we found also that we could get this chartreuse foliage with large bristled redheads without having any extra color on the foliage, and that led to Jade Princess.
Okay, Keenan, you're a turf grass geneticist. This is not turf grass, last time I checked, but you are apparently in the process of going even beyond the 4 that have already been released into something really way cool. Do you want to talk about that a little bit if you can?
The reality is there's really some just great colors and canopy architecture, seed head characteristics that we really haven't fully exploited yet. And those are really some of the new traits that I see coming forward in future cultivars. So we're really excited. This next summer, 2016, we're expecting the release of Copper Prince. And it has this really nice copper color foliage. It has a nice full seed head, and it's about the same height as Jade Princess, so it's one of our more dwarf varieties. And then following that, we expect to have a new release called Blackbeard, which will be out in another year or two, which has similar foliage characteristics, that coppery color, a little darker, a little more full canopy, and much fuller, have really bristled seed heads.
So as people in the landscape world look forward to what they can use either in their own landscapes or in wonderful, beautiful containers all over the country and around the world as we understand it, what do you see as the attributes of the millets that are absolutely great, sort of those timeless pieces of a plant in the gardening world?
Well, for me, really, the ornamental types are dramatically different from the grain types, and they're dwarf. They have beautiful colors and characteristics that are very different from what you might expect when you think of grain types of pearl millet. And the reality is they have very upright stems, and so that provides a nice upright contrast in the landscape. They have really great chartreuse, dark green and purple colors. The seed heads are really full. They're a great reservoir for certain insects in the landscape, and the seeds also provide a lot of food and seeds for birds, and so it definitely brings a component, wildlife component to the landscape too.
Thanks, guys, for doing this. It is really a fun, exciting thing in the gardening world, and we are really looking forward to whatever you're going to be coming out with next.
Well, thanks for having us, Jim.
Thanks very much.
What was once considered only a forage grain is now really a wonderful plant you can experiment with in your own garden or in containers. Millet comes in plenty of great colors to choose from as long as you have the ornamental pearl type. It has interesting foliage and it comes in different heights. It's no wonder it has become all the rage in the gardening world. Winter isn't exactly the time everybody thinks about watering their landscape, but it is a crucial issue when it comes to keeping your plants healthy through the late fall and into the harsh winter months. For our landscape lesson this week, we want to turn your attention to proper watering in the late fall. To water consistently and well in the landscape is actually a little more difficult than it might seem. We talk a lot about not using your automatic irrigation system for your turf for landscape plants. You can certainly use one that is zoned for those landscape plants, but what we often see is we see people with their thumb on the end of the hose or a nozzle on the end of the hose just going like this and assuming that that is going to give those plants enough water. It's particularly important to send them into the winter months with enough moisture so that those pore spaces in the soil don't dry out, causing the roots to dry out and then causing that plant to show winter desiccation. So what you really want to do is you want to have a good idea about how much volume your own hose is putting out if you're using a hose or a sprayer on the end of the hose. And then you want to make sure you have actually tested that soil by using a chaining pin or a screwdriver or your finger if you can dig it in there deep enough, or something like a stake just to drive that down into the ground and see whether it goes in easily. If it does, you have applied enough water at the right level for those plants. One of the things that we also recommend with people is that you turn on your hose at the volume that you think you're going to be using in your landscape if you're hand watering or spot watering. Count by seconds how long it takes at that volume to fill up a 5-gallon bucket. And then you can actually apply that in the landscape if you're using, again, that same volume on the end of the hose. We see people turn on a nozzle at full blast and just blaze away at plants. That can actually do a lot of damage, especially if your soil is extremely dry and you have any sand content or any light content in it at all. It can blow that soil right away from the roots and expose them. So again, you want to make sure that you know how much volume of water, how much you're applying. Even if you're doing it by hand, you want low and slow if at all possible, rather than assuming you can take care of an entire landscape in 15 or 20 minutes at the most. It's going to take you a fair amount of time to apply the right amount of water at the crown of the plant. For newly established or newly planted trees and shrubs, especially in the fall of the year, it is really important to make sure that water is going in the root zone as well as saturating the surrounding soil. Using good watering practices throughout the season is crucial to the health of all your plants, turf, and trees. Neglecting that after the growing season can mean serious problems for your landscape in the winter as those plants struggle to get the water they need. It's really a good idea to keep a mental note of that late in the season, and even on some of the warmer days of the winter, add water if you need to keep them alive and thriving. Let's take a few minutes now to answer our viewer emails. We'd love to hear from you, and perhaps you can share a picture or two with us. Just send us an email to byf@unl.edu. Our first question comes from a Lincoln viewer who sent in a picture of a spider. Seems like a weird time of year for that, but of course they will lay their eggs and creep into all those warm places just like the rest of us when we get too cold. His concern, especially in the Lincoln area, was, is this a brown recluse? Is everybody in his office going to run shrieking from a poisonous little creature? And so we asked Jonathan Larson, our great entomologist. He said this is a triangulate cobweb spider, not even remotely related to those brown recluses, except that it's a spider. It will not bite. It will not cause great chaos and destruction in the office from dead people. So enjoy it, turn it loose. If you can't stand it, smash it with a boot or a brick. Okay, we have a Hastings viewer who sent us a question in kind of late fall, kind of an interesting series of issues associated with this. She has one of the spireas that has the gold or the chartreusey leaves. Gold flame is one of them. Lime mound is another. There's several that have that kind of variegation in the foliage. And hers have not been performing really well in this situation. She's done some replacement with them. She's lost one or two over and over again. We noted a couple of different things for this particular question. The first being that it appears as though the mulch, which is rock on landscape fabric, is not necessarily something that we typically recommend. Well, rock mulch can be much better than no mulch at all so that you're not scalping shrubs with a lawnmower. It really will hold the heat. It's inert. On top of landscape fabric, you may end up with issues such as either too wet underneath that fabric and rock or too dry if the soil does dry out. And there's really not a good way to tell. These are also awfully close to the foundation of the house. Many times what we see when we have shrub or plant issues right against a house is there may be something underground in the soil that is actually toxic or certainly not good for the health of the plant that is really a result of the construction process. You also have the potential for reflected heat. You add sort of the triple whammy to this with the fact that many of these smaller spireas with the chartreuse variegation in the foliage seem to have a genetic predisposition to getting what we call iron chlorosis. So they're going to go off color. One stem may be chlorotic, another one may not. You can do some soil amendment or treatment with that to allow the iron that is bound up in the soil to be released in a form the plant can use. But it really goes back to a couple of things to begin with. If these plants were purchased late in the season, maybe 50 or 75% off, planted late in the season with a small root mass that may have been compromised by sitting outside in a landscape setting or a retail setting all summer long, they probably didn't get a good chance to establish. That might be part of the reason that you're seeing some of these issues with the foliage. If you purchase a plant that's got a really small root ball, a number 1 container as opposed to a number 2, again, think in terms of that can either dry out very quickly or get really, really soggy, and you might not know that with that mulch situation. So, really the best advice would be let's pull those up, see what's going on in the surrounding environment, not just with the plant itself. Consider pulling them a little bit away from the house. Take a look at changing that mulch, and certainly purchase, if you need to next year, if they die again over the winter, purchase plants from a good, reliable source. We're going to finish today's program with a look at switchgrass. We've talked a lot about ornamental grasses in past episodes of Lifestyle Gardening because they can really make a dramatic statement around your home or business. They can add so much texture, color, and interest as either a centerpiece or as a backdrop to your shorter ornamentals. Let's take a few minutes to focus on one of the stars of ornamental grasses, our native switchgrass. The delicate branched panicles of switchgrass float above the prairie in Nebraska during the fall of the year, making it a wonderful addition to our prairies. Those little seeds, however, can really be aggressive and cause even the prairies to turn into almost a monoculture of this grass. Fortunately, there are a lot of cultivars on the market that have great potential for use as ornamental landscape plants in the right setting with the other perennials, grasses, and beautiful landscape shrubs. One of the cultivars of switchgrass that can really make a huge landscape statement is Dallas Blues. Everything about this plant looks like it's on steroids. The leaves are much wider, so the blades of the grass itself looks different when it comes out of the ground in the spring. And most importantly, look at the size of the panicle and that beautiful pink color. This is a grass that is not for the small of space or the faint of heart, however, because it is a pretty heavy stemmed grass. That also means that it can fall over in the wind, it could break under a snow load. So use Dallas Blues as a specimen in the landscape if you have a lot of space for it. Consider really staking it or tying it up earlier in the spring so these beautiful panicles can stand straight and tall. These year-old Cheyenne sky switchgrasses are already showing their stuff. The difference between this one and Dallas Blues should be pretty obvious, even though that's an old plant. These are dwarf, much smaller, and they top out actually when they're mature at under 3 feet. More importantly, one of the really cool things about this grass is it has sort of a bluish tinge to the leaf blades, and then it goes into this beautiful, deep, almost a Merlot wine red. The panicles themselves are maybe not quite as showy, but overall this is a gorgeous switchgrass for smaller spaces, places where perhaps you don't have the room for the big ones, and more importantly, maybe you want some of that red fall color. It has a cousin, a new one called Blood Brothers, which we actually haven't tried yet, but we're looking forward to putting that in the garden next year. Another cultivar of switchgrass I want to mention is the one called Northwind. It stands straight, very, very tall, especially when we have a year of good rain, and it becomes an architectural focal point or an exclamation point in the landscape. It has very dense canopy of foliage, and then the plumes themselves are held high above the foliage. One of the downsides that we have seen with Northwind switchgrass, however, is that it can produce seedlings. So you can use it for a screen, you can use it as a focal point, but do be aware that you may have to rogue out a few of those seedlings in the landscape. These wonderful grasses can add so much interest around your home, but you may have to keep an eye on some of the cultivars so that they don't get out of control. But properly cared for, they will give you years of beauty and satisfaction. Thank you so much for joining us again for Lifestyle Gardening. On our next program, we'll be turning your attention to turf sodding, rose diseases, and an interview about everybody's favorite creature, spiders. So good morning, good gardening. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time on Lifestyle Gardening.